Planning and Development, Counselor Andrus.
Here.
Counselor Waltney. Counselor Wolferton. Counselor Sims.
Here.
Counselor Nelms. Here. So all present. You got it.
Okay, I'll begin with a motion to dispense with the reading and approve the minutes for our previous meeting.
Second.
All right, Counselor Nelms with the motion and Waltney with the second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I only heard 2 ayes. Anybody else? Aye. Okay, Wolverton.
Aye.
All right, that passes 5-0. Okay, old business 06/06/22, public hearing held on August 8th, 2022 at 6 to consider amending the city's zoning ordinance to include the fence ordinance, brought to us by myself and Kel Smith. Mr. Smith. Oh, there you are.
Thank
Hi.
you. Yeah, I sat down. I've got a lot.
Okay. All right, we got a lot to hear from Mr. Smith tonight.
He sat
Let's
down.
start. Yeah.
So where we were was that this committee sent it back to the BZA for them to review comments that you guys had come up with, and they did that. And I'll go over some of their comments in a second. But one of the things that we got back was a lot of questions, a lot of feedback from William, who's here, in email form to the zoning ordinance. And so we've addressed most of those between us and staff. But one of those was that the question about the diagrams that we show in there, which defines rear yard, front yard, and side yards. And so these are what we are proposing. William's question was, and I don't want to misrepresent what you were asking. So currently what happens is we take the back line of the house and we just draw it straight out to the property line, whatever the furthest point in the house is back. And then these nooks, for lack of a better term, get missed and aren't really considered anything, but we consider them part of the rear yard. So this cleans that up. And William's example that he gave us, if you put a driveway in and your garage is back here and you drive into your garage, then that eliminates a lot of accessory structure area in the backyard. But we're actually increasing the backyard. And so I think what we landed on was that we're going to continue to look, and hopefully when we talk about stormwater ordinance stuff in a little bit, we won't address any of this, but know that it's coming in the next year or so, that we're going to revisit 30% and 50% and all the structure requirements on the site.
Okay.
So that's that part. There was a question from the BZA, from a BZA member, about section K1C that said no exterior fence or wall exceeding 12 inches in height shall be erected and installed. And his question was, why 12 inches? And so after Sherry, myself, and Wyatt talked about it, we agreed that anything over 12 inches that's not a retaining wall is probably like for sitting or something like that, and will be visited by, should be permitted and looked at by us. So we left that in there. And then lastly, on page 7, and this is where William pointed this out, or asked a question about it. Fences and walls shall be set back a minimum of 9 feet from a street right-of-way and 5 feet from an accessible alley. So currently, if you can put your fence, if you're adjacent to an alley, directly on the property line. And William said, and so with this, William said, well, in this case, your homeowner's losing 5 feet of their yard. So what Sherry's compromise was, and this I think is probably the only thing I need from the committee, compromise was that fences closer than 5 feet to a property line that runs parallel to an accessible alley requires a current survey dated within 12 months for fence permit application, and the placement of the fence must be approved by the city engineer. So this is going to allow fences to be placed directly on a property line when it makes sense.
Was it a side distance? Is that why was that why it was originally in there at 5 feet?
Mm-hmm. Okay. That's right. And access to for trucks and trash
Anything else
trucks
might be going down.
Right.
So the city has to approve it. So
It would be helpful for that if you put some standard about what you will determine to be reasonable.
Otherwise,
Yeah.
it might be arbitrary.
Okay, say that again. Oh, reasonable.
Yeah, maybe
Okay.
for truck travel or vehicle transport, whatever your,
Sure.
the more basis you can put into your determination as reasonable or not is helpful.
What is the standard width of the alley?
10 foot.
Usually 10 feet
Just barely.
It's
enough
supposed to
get
be,
that truck
if you
out.
build a new one, it's gonna be 20.
roadway.
Yeah, but an alley's not.
I mean, I was just curious because obviously, the more narrow, the more likely you need, the clearance on the side.
That's right, and that's what we'll be able to look at.
Okay. Yeah.
Put in that, on the property line, you've got 10 feet of asphalt, your garbage cans are out there. A lot of times they're in the asphalt.
Right.
So you're having to, do this. But like Mr. Kendrick said, you start throwing that 5 foot back, all of a sudden these people are losing their backyard on a big portion of real estate. And they've got an existing fence there. It's gonna cause, it would cause problems.
Mr. Siegel?
Yeah, to me, I totally agree that we need to get a new survey. If anybody's doing a fence, they need to get a survey and put it on there. But that was gonna be my question, is the definition in which we pull it back. Because we've got a lot of narrow alleys.
Right.
And they've always been that way. And so to start quote unquote penalizing people for being on an alley and start to say, I'm sorry, you're just on a tight section. And that seems a little arbitrary from that perspective. And if I'm an owner that just paid a whole lot of money for a piece of property, it seems like it would be reasonable to be able to fence in the backyard.
Yeah.
What happens? Carrying that fence or replacing that?
Well, I think there was actually definition on, what a restoration versus a repair. I think y'all talked about that with sounding fair.
Okay, anyone else, any other comments?
Can I
So,
ask a quick question?
yeah,
Sorry, but
yeah.
when does that get?
Well, that's my next question. So, President White, have we set the public hearing for this yet? We have not, have we?
We had a public hearing on August the 8th.
Oh, so we've just been carrying it over?
Correct. Change enough that we had to set a new public hearing.
Sounds to me like it has.
What? It hasn't changed at all yet. Nobody,
Oh, 'cause
we just
yeah,
keep
yeah.
sending it around and
Okay.
we haven't made any.
These are just comments
Okay.
at this point.
Right.
Okay,
So
okay.
At some point, we have to decide, are we making changes? And
Okay.
if we do, and they're substantial, then we have to set a new public hearing.
I feel like,
Clarifies.
I feel like I think it needs to be sent back out to the committee. We need to carry it over. It needs to, would you agree? Send back out to the committee that we can all, yeah.
The alley
I know, I'm sorry. I meant, put out what you just said to us.
Send it to them.
Yeah, send it to us, to the committee, so I meant not send it to the committee, I mean, send the email with what? I'm sorry,
Yeah,
what?
one more.
Okay.
I mean, just so we're all clear, because I think Gail and I have talked about this, the fence ordinance is gonna change the definition of a rear yard,
Yes.
which changes a
Or
lot
not.
of the other things that we've got, the 50%, the 30% rule, mainly the 30% rule, and what all qualifies. So even though we're talking about fence,
Right.
it does change the definition, which technically changes some of the other stuff.
What-
I think y'all are.
I think what he's, yes, I think he said we will be bringing that back around. So that,
Hey, did you have in there that we were removing fences as a structure, so it wouldn't count towards your?
Well, but if you're defining rear yard, that definition of rear yard then will come into the 30% rule for
Right,
structures in the backyard.
William's more concerned with the diagram that we added in here.
Okay.
Yeah, which cleans up the definition of rear yard
Yeah,
for
I get
us.
while we're trying to
Yeah.
do it, but,
because, so, as it relates to permeable surface, right?
but the rear yard
Structure.
definition is needed because of the 30% rule and the definition of structure being, driveway and stuff like that.
So here's what we'll do. We'll define this 5-foot alley fence setback
Yeah.
a little bit clearer and then send it to you guys,
Okay.
the whole thing.
Yeah,
And
the
let
whole
you
thing.
make a decision. And at that point, I'm not sure that, I don't know what happens after that.
It goes back to.
Then,
It depends on what we end up with, but it sounds to me like we might be heading towards another public hearing.
that's what I think. That's what I
Okay.
think too.
So, Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
I did have a question. I don't have the most recent version that you have, and I don't know that I found the answer to my question in the current version that I have.
Are you talking
Is
about-
artificial turf
considered, is artificial turf allowed in the front yard under the current proposal?
There was a question about turf.
We just moved that out of structure.
So that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm on
that's-
the wrong
I
item.
know,
That's
My
on the
bad.
wrong-
I know, yeah.
I just
Yeah,
totally,
that's the
yeah.
wrong-
That's on the.
I
tree
crossed up my
ordinance.
lines.
Yeah.
My bad.
Yeah, it's all good. Okay, all right, so without objection.
Fences.
We're gonna carry this.
Yes.
Okay.
Someone give me a cup of coffee.
All right, thank you, Mr. Smith, for that
Got the
item,
Keurig
but don't
full.
go anywhere.
Yeah.
All right.
Next item.
Next item,
Let's move on.
050822, request to consider revisions to the tree and landscape ordinance, Mr. Smith. So we discussed today, taking this, and dropping it from the committee. Are you okay with that, Mr. Smith? The
Yes.
reason, the
Oh,
reason.
yes, yes,
Okay,
yes,
the
yes.
reason it was staying in here
Sorry.
was to look at any issues as far as compliance, but you feel like that's not been an issue.
Right.
Okay,
The three revisions that we proposed that will be heard next week at the public hearing.
yeah.
Is where we are. Now
This
you
is
can.
the item that I
Right,
was-
this is
Go
your
ahead.
question.
Okay, go ahead.
So, artificial turf. Allowed in
Yes.
front yards, yes? Or no?
If they get a variance.
A variance.
Mhm.
That means the
From the
BCA
BCA.
gets to decide.
Mhm.
That's not okay with me.
What kind of variance would they
Yeah.
request?
Structure in the front yard.
And maybe I don't know enough about artificial turf, but my concern is the permeability, the water runoff, the impact on the storm sewers long term. You know, I understand that it can look really good, yeah, but it can also not look good. It's not always that great for trees if we're trying to adhere to the tree ordinance. So I'm not a big fan of allowing it in front yards personally. We're just gonna, throw it out there. I would propose that we prohibit it.
So currently, we consider artificial turf a structure. All right, so if you want to fill up your backyard with artificial turf, then that's going to kick you over the 30% rule that William's been talking about. So they get sent to the BZA. So in the tree and landscape ordinance, the same would be for front yard structures. Artificial turf is one of them. The revision to the tree and landscape ordinance says that artificial turf will not be considered an accessory structure. So we're moving it out of the structure definition.
Okay.
Which is questionable at best anyway, but we could add in here, not allowed in the
Front yard.
front yard if you want that.
What's the thought behind considering artificial turf a structure? Stormwater issues or what?
No. It does. So by definition, structures define basically most things that aren't organic.
So
The
anything that's-
definition in the zoning ordinance. Whether that's, so like it names like sidewalks and satellite dishes and fences.
Anything that's not growing out of the ground naturally.
Yeah, this is a different, that's a weird, to me, that seems.
It's a weird interpretation
Unorthodox to consider.
and it's certainly cloudy, but it's
Yeah.
the direction we chose 9 months ago, and we've been on that path ever
Yeah.
since.
Well, okay.
So this says that it's not a structure.
Yeah, then that's a good.
Yeah.
I still don't personally think it should be allowed in front yards, but.
And
sorry.
further, no, you're fine. I just wanted to continue the discussion before we change as far as turf goes. So the one provision related to it being in the backyard currently that's proposed for the future public hearing, right? Does it have any regulations around like how permeable it is? For example, someone obviously can't do concrete and then slap it on top of it.
That's correct. So the definition for artificial turf that is the revision that we're proposing, that's going to be heard next week, says artificial turf is synthetic materials made to resemble natural grass. Artificial turf will not be considered an accessory structure if a detailed engineered section is submitted to and approved by the city engineer. So basically, it means if you want to put artificial turf in your backyard, you have to submit a section to us, an engineered section that says this is what it looks like. We're not going to put it on concrete like you suggested.
Because we're still gonna have the permeable surface requirement for whatever the percentage is gonna be, but there's still, so you can't put turf down and it be 100% of your yard, because you're gonna be in violation of the percentage of permeable surface.
Okay.
Not necessarily.
Not anymore. It's taking it out of structure.
I just had a couple of things on the turf, and I've been meeting with some local architects, and I've got some information. that Cale has been gracious enough for us to go back and forth. He hadn't heard some of these things. But as far as turf, I would completely agree with you that it probably doesn't need to go in front yard, right? And for rear yard, I agree with the definition of it. I would love if there was a definition of it and an inspection, because there's no inspections for landscapers that do it. So I'm not sure who that falls on, but anybody can get a cut section off the internet, turn it in and say we're good. But if there's not an inspection to say it's permeable surface, it could be on like a crush and run hard surface, and then it's gonna have the same problem as a driveway or anything else. I'd love to hear what the tree revisions are. One thing that we had talked about as a group with, again, architects and some other folks, is the tree ordinance now, unless I'm incorrect, does not require a tree in the front yard. It requires a certain number of trees, where it used to be that they were required it per certain number of linear feet. And I don't know if we have to go back to that, but if we are trying to protect a general canopy of trees in Homewood, technically, just so everybody knows, I can put 3 trees together in the back right of the property, and I think there's some trees like hollies that are not necessarily going to give you any canopies. They're qualified trees, so I'm not sure what all the.
Not supposed to be. I'm happy to get with you, Will.
Oh, that's not supposed to be. Okay. Well, and so, but location is not determined. So just as a thought that,
Yeah.
maybe front yard location.
And pre-conditional, right? Because usually, if you're required to plant one in the front yard, that's the one that's gonna give you the most impact, and the one that's gonna live the longest, rather than the one in the backyard where they want to put in the playground.
Possibly. And so again.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And there are a lot of things that we could address with it. So we took, there are 3 things to answer your question. The artificial turf blurb about taking it out of the accessory structure definition. The second one basically deals with like strip centers. If you have a strip center and there's one empty space for a tenant, we currently are requiring them to redo all the parking lot to come into compliance with the tree and landscape ordinance, even if it's just a tenant fit out. And so this takes that out if they are, if the work is less than 50% of the building area. Or site improvements less than $5,000. So if you want to put in an accessible ramp up to your front door from your driveway, then it doesn't trigger. Or if you want to renovate your kitchen, it doesn't trigger the tree and landscape ordinance. And then the third one is allowing applicants or homeowners to pay $750 for 25%, for over 25% of the required MTD per tree, $750 per tree. So if you need 2 trees, you have to plant 1, and you can pay for 1. If you need 4 trees, you have to plant 1, and you can pay for 3.
If you were to add the no turf in the front yard, could you add that into that blurb without us having to, can we add that as a motion tonight? To prohibit. Or do we add it at the public hearing?
We'll have to.
Yeah, I'm saying.
You're saying get it in there.
Yeah, get it in there,
so that-
if you're in agreement with that, Mr. Smith.
Yeah, that's fine with me.
Maybe the committee.
Public hearing set on
It's
It
for
is
1
Monday.
week from
this? 1
tonight.
week from today.
Monday.
So,
Yeah.
so if we're
We've already
changing
published.
the ordinance,
We're,
it's
yeah.
already been published.
Mhm.
and
Go ahead. Yeah, okay.
I'm not
We're just
sure.
adding we're adding,
Here's,
okay.
if we're going to change the ordinance on one item,
Yeah.
there are 2 others that are time
Yes, I understand,
sensitive.
yeah, but gotcha, okay.
If we don't want to, I don't want to have to republish
Yeah.
the whole thing for all 3 items. If we could take on 2 of them next week that are not requiring an amendment, I would prefer to go ahead and make those 2 changes, assuming the council wants to, and deal with those next week. And then the third item, we could choose to not move forward with if everyone wants a revision, and then we'll start that process over with that item. But I don't want to hold up the other 2.
No, I understand, yeah.
Because the other 2 are really causing some problems.
Totally understand, yep, I totally understand. Go ahead, Mr. Cook.
Hey, you mentioned something about $700,
And $50. $750.
and that's in lieu of planting a tree?
Yes.
You have to plant
What
one.
percentage of it?
You have to plant 25% of your
Right.
required MTD.
Yes, it's not, that was a concern I had
$750 a
too.
tree.
Okay, well, William, what does it
Because-
cost to plant a tree? $350?
Depends on the tree.
Well, I know, but, I mean,
Tree
maple
size.
tree, 2.5 caliper, higher.
I would think it's a little bit more than that.
Yeah, it is. It's the price of the tree, then the cost of labor
Yeah,
and
it's gonna be.
keeping it alive.
Okay, well, I mean, as a developer, am I gonna pay the city $750 to just plant another $400 tree? Okay, you'd probably just plant a $400 tree, right?
Perfect.
Well,
That's what makes you empty.
Well, does it, I guess, does it qualify, does it cover the?
So my point is maybe we better bring that dollar figure down to where they're not just gonna plant a tree just to save money, not have to pay us $750. And that money would go into the city coffers to plant a tree somewhere else. That makes sense?
But I mean, don't we want them to plant a tree on site ideally? So it's kind of creating this, if you want an option to defer not planting on site, then that's why it is more, because it's kind
I
of
almost
not.
feel like it's too cheap.
No, if I may.
Yes.
If I'm required to plant 4 trees, okay, it's $400 a piece, and that's what I was calling it planting, and I chose not to plant one of them.
No, you have to plant with
Then I have to pay the city $750. I'll just plant the 4th tree,
That's good,
you know?
because then they maintain it and we're not.
Well, this gave me some pause too, just because we want to incentivize tree planting on private property, because it's one of the few places really have to gain canopy back, because the canopy is quickly getting eroded in the city, and it's going to change the look and feel long term. My thought was to go up on it, but I see where you're coming from. I would prefer to incentivize people to plant trees. However, I am mindful of the fact that you may have a yard, of course, and this is where I'd need some professional assistance, but if the yard is, like, where would we get to the point that we need 4 trees on a property? How often? Is it 10% of the yards? Is it 5%? Is it all of them?
No, it's probably 70%.
70%?
It's a quarter of an acre.
Solid.
Quarter acre is 4 trees?
Yeah. Sorry.
All right, so we were talking about this the other day, so now with the hardscape, you have to put in these retention retention things in the ground. So that limits your area where you can plant a tree too. You're still required to plant it. So, and sometimes these houses are so close together, somebody just gonna plant a hardwood tree up between the 2 houses that you know is not gonna live or be cut down in a few years. So we can't dictate actually where they plant them on their property. So why not just take their money and let us plant it in a nice environment, wide right of way somewhere to where we know it will
I think
live.
that's
Then
the
we have
problem,
more
though,
trees
is-
to plant.
Well, even if we did plant on the right of way, though, we don't have that many opportunities. We explored that a couple years ago, and largely, I
couldn't
forget,
find
it was the
places.
AGC or whoever came back and said, we have almost exhausted the right of way locations that we can
Yeah.
plant trees safely.
Because I remember we were like, let's just put them all on
Yeah.
the
That's why I
school
thought that was-
property, yeah.
Yeah.
We're looking, Graham and I are looking right now at the Whataburger site in Wildwood. We had to cut down, all those trees over there are just crap now. And that's, we need to replant that whole area.
Stay right with that.
Well, just to go back to Mr. White's point, President White's point, we've already sent this out, so this is what's going to the public hearing. So the question is, do you want to take on the front yard and the turf right now?
If you're saying we need this to move along,
The
because
other
of
two
issues
items.
that are being
You need to
caused in
you
DEC.
need to I believe you need to send it out as it is, and council, we can decide not to move forward with any of them that we don't want to, but that way we can.
President White, we already have moved it out. The reason why I brought it back up tonight, which, sorry, was that we were going to drop this item because we left it in committee to monitor how compliance was going.
Right.
But Mr. Smith and I talked about it today, and so we were gonna just drop the item. We've already sent it out
How do we drop the item if we've already sent it?
because we left it in committee.
Right, then we can't drop the item.
Oh, till
It's
after,
already
okay,
on the
okay,
thing.
okay, you're right,
It'll be in
sorry,
committee.
you're
You can't
right.
drop it. You
Until-
you gotta send it back to council.
Okay, but we have already sent it out.
Correct. And
Okay,
it's set for a public hearing.
Right.
You just need to send it out again so that if everyone knows it's not in committee anymore.
right now, okay.
Did you send it out and you proposed it and left it here, right?
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
So-
So that's what I'm saying, yes. So do you want to take on the turf right now? Do you want to go ahead
No,
and do that?
if we need this to move forward to make sure that things are
Yeah, what I'm saying is,
operating efficiently, I get it.
yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Is if the item is already out.
Yes.
Then we could deal with all three there. I
Like,
think it gets
get it off
confusing
my agenda.
unless you send it out again.
Okay.
I think it's confusing.
This is gonna be on
for
consent
public
agenda, too.
Purposes.
Okay.
Because it's gonna show up on multiple places on the
It'll be on the
agenda. So
consent agenda
if you
and
would
the
just
public
send it out without recommendation.
I gotcha.
We will send back whatever components we want
Okay.
to send back on Monday.
All right, do I have a motion to send this out without recommendation pending public hearing?
So moved.
Counselor Nellens, do I have a second?
Second.
A second from Counselor Sims. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Who was the second?
Sims. Nellens Sims. All right, new business, 060922, a request to amend ordinance 2754, ordinance to regulate stormwater management post-construction. Mr. Smith.
Thank you. Berkeley's gonna love this. I got a PowerPoint and everything. I asked Counselor Andrus if I could take a few minutes just to kind of give you guys an update on stormwater and where we are, like what the city actually does, where we've come from, and where we plan to head. Like the mayor said last week, stormwater is our biggest threat in Homewood right now. And we're doing some things that are a little bit more progressive than other municipalities around us, and we haven't caught up to them in some areas yet. So I want to talk about a couple of things. Brian, you can. Yeah, good. We got civil engineers here and contractors.
This is interesting. I really came down here tonight.
Yeah. I did this just for you, Mark.
Thank you.
3 contributing factors, and I put all this together and I made all this stuff up, so if Mark wants to disagree, he certainly can. Changes in environmental conditions, those are things that we can't do anything about, right? But in context, they're important to know, like what's happened in the past decade. I'll talk a little bit about what's happened in the past 2 years, because that's what I know about. Development, so how can we do better with our ordinance to require home builders and homeowners to redevelop more responsibly with regard to stormwater? I think the mayor referenced this last week, but we're on a tipping point, I think, in some of our communities, whereas if we continue to develop over the next decade like we've done over the past decade, some of these houses are going to be underwater, right? So what can we do different with our ordinances? And lastly, it's aging infrastructure. That's a real thing. We all know we've got failing creek walls and pipes that are collapsing. I'm not going to talk much about that tonight, but our stormwater master plan will identify the areas that are at greatest risk, and then we'll be able to go after those with Berkeley and put together a capital improvements plan and tackle those. All right, Brian. So changes in environmental conditions. Between April 21 and March 22, we had 20 fewer rain days, but we had 2 more feet of rain. All right, so that means that every time it rains, it pours, right? The storms are much more intense than they have been before. Between April, same dates, 21 and 22, we had 8 storm events that were worse than the worst storm that we had between March 20 and April 21. So that means every 6 weeks we have the storm event that was the worst one 2 years ago.
Yeah, the 50-year storm every couple months?
Yep.
Yeah, cool. Like it.
So y'all might think this is funny. I don't, but I started right here in April 21.
Welcome to Homewood.
Yeah, I brought the rain with me. All right, Brian. I know when you guys love engineers to show you charts and graphs and stuff, but bear with me through this. There's a gauge at Shades Creek after Griffin Brook dumps out into it, so it's down by Crescent Apartments. And what this represents is the left side is feet in elevation. So you see these lines as they go up. That means that the elevation in the creek has risen, right? So the blue lines, you can barely see them down here, blue, and then there's some red down here. Those are the storm events that happened 2 years ago, from April 20 to May 20, or April 21. And then the yellow, orangey color are the events that happened between April 21 and May 22. So May 4th, 2021, we had a 100-year event. So if you take this line right here and sort of drag it across, then this line kind of represents the 2 to 5 year storm event, which means that storms are only supposed to happen one time in 2 to 5 years. but we had 6 or 8 of them, including one that was a 100-year event, and one that was a 10-year event in October of 21. And then, I mean, you see it. So bottom line is we're trending towards more intense storm events, which leads to more flooding. All right, Brian. I'm going to talk about this for a second because this is, we don't talk about it enough, I don't think. But if I'm hired to design a subdivision in Shelby County in the middle of nowhere, there are reference manuals out there that tell me safe assumptions that I can make when I design stormwater infrastructure. They were probably about the same numbers as they were when Homewood was designed 120 years ago, or however long it was. So these reference manuals tell me that for a subdivision with quarter-acre lots, I'm allowed about 38% average impervious areas. That's for my entire subdivision. So impervious area includes roadways, sidewalks, rooftops, all these things. Third of an acre is 30% impervious area. So as the lots get bigger, the homes don't get bigger, the lots get bigger, and so your impervious area goes down, right? Commercial and business is 85%. So if you think about downtown Homewood, we should be at 85%, but we're probably about 98% impervious, right? So then looking at what other folks around us do, Vestavia allows 30% structures on residential lots. They have bigger lots, they allow 30% coverage for structures. Mountain Brook, depending on where you are and how big your lot is, they allow about 40% of their lots to be covered by structures. Homewood allows you to load up your lot with 50% structures on the lot. It doesn't matter what size the lot is, you can put 50%, cover your 50% of your lot with structures. So if I design that storm network in Shelby County for 38% impervious area, and then 10 years down the road, we've built it out to 50% total, my system fails, right? The whole thing just kind of falls apart because we haven't developed responsibly. So we're not, this isn't part of the proposed changes tonight, but know that this is coming. We're working with our stormwater master planners to look at some of this stuff and figure out how we can make adjustments comprehensively to the overall zoning ordinance and also stormwater ordinance to make it make sense, where we're not, lost my train of thought for a second. So we're working with these folks to come back to you guys probably in 6 months to a year to talk more about this.
Who are you working with again?
Kimley Horn is our
Kimley Horn.
stormwater master plan consultant. All right. Better news is that about 8 months ago, Wyatt and I got together and said, how can we mitigate stormwater runoff with the zoning ordinance, or with the stormwater ordinance that we currently have? And so we figured out that our stormwater ordinance says if you increase your site by 10% impervious area, then you have to mitigate that stormwater, that 10% runoff. So if Councilor Smith has a house that covers 40% of her site and she wants to make it 55%, bad example, 30% of her site and she wants to make it 42%, then she can, but she's got to mitigate that 12%. And the way we do that is usually through these underground storage systems that Scott talked about a minute ago, or bioswales. This takes up property, these don't. You can still put your backyard or front yard over on top of it, or driveways. Basically the way these work is that we're collecting stormwater either through yard inlets or through downspouts and roof drains and taking them to that, and it's holding the water there and slowly trickling it out. Right.
Is that under the structure?
It's like under your yard or under your driveway.
Under your yard. Yeah.
Not under your building though.
Yeah,
Not under your building.
Yeah, wouldn't be good under your house.
This is
Absolutely.
essentially what Jason Hale had to do in that property over
Yep.
like Morrison.
That's right.
Yeah.
And his request that day, he was doing one of these, his request was to take the outlet pipe across the right of way so he could discharge it into a stream. Here's the problem though with our stormwater ordinance is that these are usually not designed by a civil engineer. They can be designed by William or by an architect or by somebody else. But what typically happens is William sends his sketch and his site plan to me, and he says, hey, we're doing one of these systems. This is how much volume we need. And it ends up, William and I end up just negotiating with each other and talking through how the design should work and how the site lays out and all that. And we don't need to be in the business of that, of me coordinating that with William. We should be reviewing these things, not designing it for them.
Right, not doing
Some projects, civil engineers are involved, but not all of them. So what the proposed revision does, Brian, and this is what Berkeley's been waiting on, is this adds a civil engineer on every project that increases impervious area by any amount. So what this does is require a letter from a civil engineer that basically says this development, it's increasing impervious area by however much, it doesn't matter how much, but we're increasing impervious area. We're not going to create adverse effects on downstream neighbors or downstream infrastructure or any of that. So everything else stays in place. The 10% rule is still in effect, like where stormwater mitigation would be required. But probably what will happen is I'm picking on William because he's sitting right here. If he does a job that increases impervious area by 8%, and I'm the civil engineer that he hires, then I go and look at the site and I say, no, I can't write a letter because you are creating adverse effects. We've got to do something to mitigate that stormwater. And so we come up with creative solutions on how to do it. This is certainly a step in the right direction, I think. I know that it does create impacts for homeowners and home builders, but at the end of the day, the stormwater infrastructure that we have can accommodate the additional runoff that we're creating.
I think our constituents know that. I mean, I think they know that. I think they know that.
I was just going to say too, I mean, knowing where we're at now already, and that it creates, reoccurring issues. I mean, is there an opportunity to actually have an improvement on site, or is that where we just have to increase capacity on our infrastructure?
No, that's what we're trying to mitigate. We're trying to require homeowners to mitigate stormwater on site.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought you were just saying it couldn't be any that runoff essentially couldn't be worse or couldn't be more runoff post construction than is now. So this is actually an improvement then.
Yeah,
okay.
That's right.
All right, I missed that clarification. Thanks.
And I know Williams probably has some questions about some of this. I will say this about Twin though, they are certainly on the side of responsible development. He's asked us many times to provide information. We oftentimes provide William a moving target and ask him to hit it. And we can't always be clear with our direction toward him. This helps us a lot. Say, look, you just need to hire an engineer and let them figure it out.
If I can mention something. One, I'm in total agreement that this is the right direction. I think it just needs to happen. I do have a question on enforcement of it, and should the engineer, actually then sign off that it was done properly. From an engineering perspective, that's another question. Can I get an engineer to actually sign up to do this over and over again it's not very exciting project for them. I don't know how they,
right?
I don't know how they work their fee structures. I mean, there's a lot of questions that go into this, but obviously, based off the slides, we've got issues, right, that need to get resolved in there. One of the things that was noted on the slide is the permeable surfaces or impermeable surfaces that are allowed in Mountain Brook, it does vary per area in Vestavia, which is 30%, but they do allow for permeable surface. And so, again, I think there's a whole list of things that we can go through, not all of which need to happen right now, but there's a bigger picture here that should we be encouraging, and or requiring some permeable concrete, some, permeable surface. Right now, you get very little credit for it. There's some credit in the rear. And so there's a lot of, like you said, a lot of moving parts. This is, to me, a good first step in making this work, but I think there's also other things to consider when we're looking at it. Again, not trying to solve everything tonight, just, something we'll continue to have some conversations about.
100% agree. And that's where we're headed.
Right.
And you do get 5% credit if you do more permeable surfaces.
That's a little cloudy also.
It's a little, because it
Yeah.
doesn't define what the permeable surface can be, how much you need it, it's tough to, that's a tough one.
We just tell them to put artificial turf in the front yard.
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead, Mr. Martin.
Okay, so if I have a house that just by chance I've got 50% impermeable surface and 50% non, and I want to tear the house down and start over, I have to drop down to 30%, correct? Or that's the direction we're headed?
I think that's what we said.
Not with this change.
This change has nothing to do with that.
Right now, you're gonna be able to build your house
That's
back
a
to
Vestavia, that's
50%.
what it is.
Yeah, that was just a Vestavia. I do have, like, if the engineer has a solution that's, let's say we're adding, because we're gonna have situations where we're adding 20 square feet to a house, right? So if you're adding 20 square feet, is the engineer open to a solution that maybe removes some drywall or, not drywall, some driveway or patio area to get some credits back?
100%.
Yeah, so he's got a little bit of freedom
Yep.
to work and to make sure that there's still no adverse
Yep.
effect. Right.
That's right.
Yeah, it's just an increase in the number.
Correct.
Right at the end of the day. In other words, if you take away 30 feet and you add 20, you're good. It's not about changes, it's about the number, as I understand it.
There's areas that that right now you can't tie into our stormwater system because of the age. There's no way possible to do that. I mean, there's areas in Hollywood that are hanging on with a thread to chain because it's terracotta pipe. That, that this thing's real. I mean, if we don't grab a hold of it, it's here and it's not going away, and it's something that really, when anyone gets done with it, we really need to be proactive in our movement towards this, because it is, if you went in these drains and seen what we've seen, you'd understand. And you want to be able to accommodate the builders with these things, but our system is so aged that, you're unable to do that in a lot of areas. So, thinking outside of the box and putting things in place that, I know it seems tough for builders or homeowners, but it's gonna have to be a way that goes outside of the box in certain ways, because, there's just no other way to do some of this. Mark's been around long enough, he knows some of the aging system of this thing that we've got.
Yeah, I've replaced a bunch of your storm drains.
Yep.
The aging storm drainage system that you've talked about, Kel, whatever, it's real. And it was designed on a different set of parameters than what we design on today.
Yep.
So it was right the day it was done 50 years or 100 years ago in design, but it doesn't meet the today's standards that we're seeing. I will say this, there's a lot of discussion that's going on. You can't resolve it tonight without, because pervious pavements aren't a panacea to all stormwater runoff, because they take maintenance and not all soils take those words into the ground. Some of them don't have the ability to, so that's one issue. And all these underground systems that you're looking at need a discharge point. You're saying I can't tie into your storm drain system.
Yeah.
I can't discharge at the surface. I gotta discharge someplace else. And I'll say this, when you start adding all these single family residences on there, if I wanna make a 2,000 square foot building addition, or even 500, now I've gotta do something for a 3rd acre lot that is gonna be very, very difficult to do. And if I don't have a storm pipe to tie to, where am I discharging that pipe? So there's tons of discussions to be had on this thing.
Well, and then what, to Cale's point, now you don't have an engineer that's gonna sign off on this.
You know what's gonna be interesting is if you can find an engineer willing to take the job on, because I'm not gonna take on that 3rd acre lot.
Yeah.
It's a liability not worth it.
Yeah, if I get $500 to take on that liability, no. I'm gonna take on that commercial subdivision that he's talking about.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna design that, but my fee is much larger, and so it's gonna be interesting to see who's willing to help these guys out. Because there's gonna be a lot of us that are gonna say, that's not worth my time.
We got a few of them that are currently working with it.
And if you got enough for what you're
Be an
doing.
engineer, could be an outlet professional, like a landscape architect, somebody, or a certified stormwater specialist, instead of limiting it to engineers. engineer, and I know you are one, so it's biased, but yeah.
And Mark, can I get you to sign in over here?
I'll go sign in again later tonight.
Last night, and you'll sign in.
Yeah, so I've run into this, I mean, I agree with William, we gotta do something, I mean, everybody's in agreement. When we get an engineer out, just a regular old lot that we would build for anybody in Homewood, and I've got anything from $3,500 to $8,000 from an engineer to design a system. So there is a lot of concern I have on finding somebody that will come and put a stamp on it and charge a reasonable amount. And I don't know, I mean, I think I've floated this out before, you know, are we gonna get to a point where we were better suited or are better suited to just charge, what would this engineer's charging me, you know, $7,500? Would we have been better to have a fee of $7,500 to put into the city's coffers, you know, to go and upgrade a storm system? You know, does that begin to make more sense? I don't know. Where it's more, hey, I can't get an engineer to sign off on this job. Is there a fee associated with it that I could then pay? Or are we, you know, essentially stuck and no, you can't build on this lot because we can't find an engineer?
Yeah, well, I'm not, I mean, so you're talking a little bit about like kind of a stormwater utility?
Well, I'm just saying, if I'm telling a homeowner they're gonna have to spend $7,500 just for the stamp, just to get something designed, much less to put it in. Hey, my question is, are we, let's say it ends up costing the total, including the stamp, $15,000. And they're in a spot that maybe isn't very impactful, like this is a spot that we're not in terracotta pipes and et cetera, would it have been better for the city to collect said money to fix the system downstream where we are having problems, as opposed to this particular lot in this particular space?
How do you assess that cost on properties that are different sizes and acreages?
Yeah, I'm just saying it's a lot of money to do it, and I'm just curious if we're putting money in the right spot. I mean, I know we need to do something, but I just don't know.
Or will it discourage overdevelopment? I don't know. Is that
I think,
desirable?
I think that's the answer, instead of trying to fix what is in place, because, I mean, if the current infrastructure that exists is in such bad condition and is so undersized that you can't, I mean, if we were to fix it and make it all brand new, then we're creating problems further down Chase Creek, right? Mm-hmm. We're pulling plugs. I mean, we're stuck with what we have downstream. Does that make sense?
Well,
Yeah.
and then the costs that are associated with like replacing a pipe, $15,000 doesn't even touch that.
Right.
I mean,
sure.
you'd have to have like
You have to do
25 of
25
those
of those.
to make it worth our while to replace the pipe, and that's just the facts of the matter right now.
Nor would it necessarily touch the amount of damage to a single property if something ends up happening there.
Right, exactly.
And so, I think this is a good first step. I think that what everyone has said tonight is correct, that this is at the same time that we're doing the repairs and the work on the stormwater system that will come out of our survey, we need to be pursuing this parallel track of, okay, how do we make sure that we're not just fixing that problem that's existed for a long time, but we make it sustainable for the future. And the way we do that is by adjusting the ordinances as we need to in order to encourage development in a way that meets the change in the environmental conditions and all the other changes that we've got going on and that will probably occur in the future, unforeseen changes that will occur in the future. I think this is an important step because right now there's a lot of work being done where there's simply not any engineering to determine what's happening with water. And it's difficult for us as a city after the fact to then sort of figure out, well, you know, what was done there, what wasn't done there, what could have been done there. We need to know this on the front end as to what the impact of the development is. And the only way that I know to do that is to have an engineer look at it and say, here's what the effect is. And if we know that going into a project, we are in much better position to deal with whatever that effect is, and we are much better equipped to answer any questions about what that effect was that turn around and come back 5 years later. And so I think that it's important to, that's why it's important to have this. And like I said, the only way I know to do that is to have an engineer do it, and yes, it's gonna increase the cost of development, of residential development. There's no way around it. That is going to be the cost. We are gonna have even greater costs, fantastically greater costs in my opinion, for the city if we don't do it, and everyone's gonna end up paying it anyway. And so we might as well get it right on the front end, and this is the first step to doing that.
Well, and I think also it puts the onus on those that are altering and adding to the problem currently. It puts that cost on.
Well, I think in that aspect though, you wanna work together. I think the city wants to work with the builders and homeowners. You want it to be a joint venture. That all of us are here, we're working, people are living it. I mean, we want it to, I think for all of us, is something, and again, we can't keep up fast enough to build it fast enough to do with whatever thing's been done.
That's right.
But putting something in place that begins to systematically avert some of the negative that's been going on is the procedure that has to begin in place. And I think, like you said, and Mark, you're right, is working together with everybody. Same thing. I mean, I don't think it's going to be one shoe or one size fits all in the shoebox. It's working together to see, but in the end, it's protecting everybody's property that's building or not building. And I think that's, you know where I'm at on it. So I think it's a great first step. And again, I'm like, there's a lot of nuances in it that's got to be looked at, but I think we got to begin somewhere, and I think this is grabbing a hold and starting.
There's a lot left to do.
One nuance that's related to this, though, is for the implementation of it, who is doing the inspection of it? Is that Wyatt? Is that
For the inspection of what?
Scott? For
Make
the
sure
inspection of what
signing
happens.
off on.
Because,
What do they do?
is the engineer signing off that, hey, the letter I wrote was actually performed according to the way I wrote it? Or is that something the inspection department's doing? Or are we putting that back on the engineer to say, hey?
In other words, is the letter about the design, or is it about the design from the engineer's
Yeah,
standpoint?
they're two letters or one. I mean, is
Yeah.
there a letter saying this is what we need to do and a letter signing it off, or are you signing off on the letter and what you did? Because if so, it's just it's a question, but I think it's.
Right, so that's gonna be on the engineer to make sure that your project gets built like they designed it, or like you told them it would get built.
Right.
Yeah.
So from an inspection point, they're actually gonna inspect it, and I turn that into Wyatt and say, hey, we're clear.
Yep.
Because said engineer said we're clear.
Counselor
Right.
Andrews.
No one's saying no.
No.
Counselor
Hold on, hold on.
They're saying,
One saying yes, one saying no.
I'm not saying anything.
No, I agree with you. The engineer needs to provide the letter at the end of the job, that you turn in.
So Counselor Andrews, so this is a standalone ordinance, correct? Not embedded in the zoning ordinance?
This is going into the.
So we would need to basically look through changes and accompanying guidance that would respond and clarify some of these questions, and then we would have a public hearing on the ordinance revisions. So it'd be a process. So essentially this item is gonna stay here and we're gonna continue to work on what revisions to the ordinance would be.
Yeah, but I wouldn't work long.
Okay.
This is a big deal, and it's.
So
That's the only revision.
that's the only revision.
That is it.
So what we can do at the next meeting is set a public hearing then, right?
Yeah, I can set
Monday's
a
meeting.
public
Do you
hearing
wanna
on
leave this
Monday
in
night on
committee?
this, if y'all are ready for me to do so.
So,
We need to clarify some of what we discussed tonight.
but what we're discussing tonight primarily is implementation.
Yes.
For procedurally at the administrative level, this is the only thing that would be advertised to be revised.
Absolutely, that's right.
So we can leave it here, but we can also ask for council to set the public hearing on Monday.
Yep.
You can send it out to set it for a public hearing and leave it here, and then deal with whatever you want to deal, to continue to talk about it leading up to that public hearing.
Is that your motion?
That's my motion.
All right, all right, second from Wolverton, a motion from Sims, second from Wolverton, all those in favor? Aye.
There's not?
Any
For an
opposed?
ordinance?
No, you can't adopt it the first time you have it, but there's no public hearing requirement for that, unless you want to have one. Sure you can.
Are we still 5-0?
I'm sorry, I thought he said there was.
So,
No, there's no public.
Okay.
Oh, because it's not part of the zoning.
Illegal.
we don't have to have a public hearing. Because it's not part of the zoning ordinance.
It's not part of the zoning code.
Yeah, I mean, we can, if y'all want to, that's up to the committee, if y'all want me to have one.
I was just assuming that it would be required. Thanks for that clarification.
But Joe, you can, it does not, if it does not require one, we don't have to do it. We can
Andrew, what
simply
would you
send it
say?
out.
I said I'm fine with that one.
Without one, okay, so do you keep your motion to approve this as written?
Yes.
Okay, is the second from Wolverton, okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Alright, that's 5-0.
So you
Okay.
just send it out, correct?
And we sent it
With
out,
a favorable
yeah.
recommendation?
Yes,
Okay,
favorable
you're done.
recommendation. So, next item, 080922, request for consideration to rezone 536 Cobb Street from GERD to West Homewood District. Application James Parsons, Shoal Engineering, owner of Village Creek Development, to facilitate potential future development. We are going to carry this over without objection, and with that, we are adjourned.
Can I ask a quick question? Aren't we gonna set a public hearing for this one anyway?
So
We have to, because
yes,
it's a
we need
rezone.
to,
Can we just set the public hearing even though?
yeah.
You can have it the October 24th.
Yeah, I would request that you send it out to set a public hearing.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'm sorry,
I will
okay.
make that
Motion from,
recommendation.
I'm sorry, we are not adjourned, and the motion is from Counselor Wolverton, is there a second?
Second.
Second from Counselor Sims, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, any opposed?